I was a coach for decades, and I often leaned on the quotes from the great UCLA basketball coach John Wooden to inspire my teams, and sometimes to console my teams during difficult times. Renowned medical expert and author Dr. Bert Mandelbaum, who counts John Wooden as one of his mentors while he was serving his fellowship at UCLA, wrote in his 2014 book, The Win Within, that, quote, "Adversity is the engine of unimagined possibilities." I'm a Venice, California-born, Los Angeles-based sports fan, one that has played, coached, announced, and promoted sports my whole life. My love affair with sports started in my own backyard and has led me to this podcast. Thanks to the support of the Amateur Athletic Union in East Bay, I'm excited to bring you Sports Stories with Denny Lennon. These are tough times, sports historians, and we certainly are facing adversity. The thought and words of those we admire can indeed give us strength. Dr. Bert Mandelbaum is one of those people. We at Sports Stories were fortunate enough to have interviewed the medical advisor to the USOC, FIFA, and multiple sports groups on March 18, just days before the series of stay-at-home orders which affect nearly 1 out of every 3 Americans. Our conversation, which started on the coronavirus and its impact on sports in part 1 and 2, remains timely in the sports world as we hear this week that the 2020 Tokyo Olympics will be postponed, most likely to 2021. Before I go on, I want to welcome today's producer of SSDL, the OG producer from the first few episodes when I didn't even introduce a producer. Christine Jimbo in the house. Jimbo.
Ain't nothing but a cheat thing, baby.
And in the house is super appropriate because she's my wife and we live in the same house, so social distancing is highly appropriate these days.
The rules do not apply when you're in the same pod.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me back. This is Sports Stories with Denny Lennon, and I'd like to tell all of you that missed part 1, you can go to the website and check that out, sportstoriespodcast.com. And if you want to visit social media sites, though, you can also find those on sportstoriespodcast.com as well.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm being welcomed back, I get to make a big announcement.
Yep.
And the announcement is, drum roll please, Facebook Live will be returning this Friday.
After a 1-week postponement.
There you go.
Yep.
That's it.
We're postponed on Facebook Live for a week like the Olympics might be for almost a year. We'll see what happens there. Hey, everybody, my Twitter handle is @SportsStoriesDL. There's been a lot of chatter on Twitter about the Olympics. I want to mention David Wharton over at the LA Times. He's been on top of the story, and so I've been retweeting a lot of his stories. I'm also going to be writing blogs, not only about the Olympics, but about the upcoming vote for the AAU Sullivan Awards, of which I'm a committee member, and some other blogs as well. So make sure you look us up on our website and follow us on our social media sites. All right, well, part 2 of this highly relevant 3-part series with Bert Mandelbaum, MD, is coming up. Hopefully you listened or watched the last episode when I had Bert give his positions at each of the sports he's associated with. It's highly impressive. In this episode, we continue our discussion about the Olympics, and then we move into Bert's life as a young man and the journey he took to the positions he holds today. As I mentioned, along the way, he formed a relationship with the great teacher John Wooden, who Bert met just after Coach Wooden faced the biggest challenge of his life. In the following clip, later in Wooden's life, the great coach, teacher, and mentor, a man who grew up in Indiana during the Great Depression, is asked about his biggest challenge.
Looking back over your life, what's the greatest challenge you've ever faced?
Losing my Nellie. That's the greatest challenge, when I didn't care much whether I carried on or not at that particular time, but with my great-grandchildren coming along, at that time she didn't live to see any of my 13, and I think then getting myself and the feet on the ground and carrying on, and I think that as far as a challenge of getting yourself under control, that was the biggest one I've had.
Considering that part 1 of this interview was the most viewed, listened to, and downloaded episode we've ever had on the show, I think it's time for me to throw it to part 2 with Bert. So, from the Cedar-Sinai Medical Building in Santa Monica, California, Here is part 2 of my 3-part interview with Dr. Bert Mandelbaum. Please note this interview was recorded March 18, 2020.
We have to have perspective and to know that tonight will exist for all of us, 99.9% of us, that there's going to be enough food and water,
Right.
and that we're going to be around our family as best we can today. And we'll look at tomorrow with a more of a critical eye. So perspective, the third P, is really key.
I thought the third P was going to be pizza.
It could be pizza tonight. I think that's what we're doing is we're ordering takeout all the time because it's important. That's another very interesting issue is the supply chain for the markets is very different than for the restaurants. The restaurants have plenty of food because of their supply chain is different than the market. So you can get from Instacart and all these online places as well as get from our local restaurants because they have plenty of food.
One of the perspectives that many of us have is popular culture, whether that's television or film. Film that's like uptick lately is Contagion, which was about 9-10 years ago, and dealt with it's similar. There's a lot of similarities. The way we view WHO or the CDC or those groups and how they interact, do you think they're accurately portrayed for the most part? Like, do we have a perspective on how those groups work, or I'm just curious what it's like to be closer to how they solve these unbelievably complex problems.
Well, I think that the World Health Organization, by the way, it lives in Geneva. There are people there who I call, and the people who work at the Centers for Disease Control, which is in Atlanta, and the World Health Organization are probably the most idealistic people in healthcare.
Okay.
Most of them were motivated when they're a high school student by the stories of previous epidemics, of understanding the relationships to bacteria and virus and fungi to disease.
Okay.
So people like Louis Pasteur, who are the icons of infectious disease and understanding these issues, had more to do with how American and all other medicine has been affected. When you look at the major iconic changes in medicine in the late 1800s, to think about the sterile Robert Joseph Lister from Glasgow giving us a sterile operating room, Fleming giving us the discovery of antibiotics in the 30s, that these are the major changes, and you have people that work in these organizations that were inspired
by them.
And their aspirations were to be part of organizations like that. So when you see and you work with these folks, you realize they're extremely passionate and extremely professional about understanding what the context is of these epidemics, of these pandemics, that how they think in terms of the public health issues, how they think in terms of understanding how to solve the problems, vaccines, and all of those that are extremely important in understanding disease. Now, that said, you have that segment, you have those recommendations, but what percentage of our public truly gets a flu vaccine? And we have 30 million people in America getting the flu every year. So what percentage of the public really gets them? It's really in the lower numbers. It's not at 90%.
Jeez.
So that's what I say. This is an ever-evolving field, but we have these professionals running these organizations, and they do their best. They're built for dealing with crisis.
One of the I don't know if it's a misperception or just a perception that the heat or the warming of the climate would help suppress a virus, but then I've also heard that we don't know because we've never seen this before, and it could very easily adapt to a warmer climate. Is that a thing?
It could be. When you first look at this and you look at 200 countries that are represented on the Worldometer website, you see at the top there's China and Italy, Spain, upper latitudes countries. And you wonder, although we don't know statistics to actually correlate or conclude that in fact there's a direct association between latitude and disease exposure and deaths, etc. You raise those questions, and I think over time we'll learn that. and we'll see those statistics.
Okay.
At this time, I don't think people could make those conclusions. And, when you look at the list, you find St. Lucia and the Grenadines and Bolivia down at the bottom, and you wonder, because they're in full summer, that probably has something to do with it, but I'm not so sure.
What do you think their parameters will be upon return? I mean, I know I'm asking you to speculate on a lot of things that we don't know, but would there be some kind of protocol that all of your athletes have to be tested free of the virus for a certain amount of time? What if somebody did carry the virus? How long is that period? It seems really complex and difficult to get to the point where NBA is good to go, MLS good to go, let alone the Olympics. It seems like there'd be a lot of hurdles.
There are. Again, one of my other phone calls I made before I jumped back into the room was another team physician who contracted the virus. He's at home. He's fine. He's not very sick. In fact, he just told me he got back from a run. He snuck out for a run, but he continues to be quarantined. He's in day 8 of his quarantine. He's got 6 more days. But one of the theories are that if he has the disease, he carries the antibodies, and that he may be the one who is not able to carry or infect anybody else, despite the fact that he ran the course of the disease.
Okay.
Now, that's theoretical, because we don't know. We talked a few minutes ago about these mutations. And do our antibodies account for all those mutations? I don't know. And I don't know that anybody truly has those answers at this time. If we believed that, in fact, those of us who've got the disease, survived the disease, came out the other side, then we should be taking their blood and using the antibodies in some way of isolating those antibodies and giving them back to people. In Italy, they're raising questions of how to do that. And I think a lot of the scientists are figuring that out right as we speak.
And then at some point, your person's identity, civil rights, and those things are going to come into play. So that's going to be, there's going to be some kind of difficulty, but obviously it's a bigger problem for all of us. I was wondering, do you think the location of the Olympic Games would have anything to do with the decision to return or to have the Olympics move forward? A location in the world. If it was that's a pretty stable government and economy there. So it seems like if there were any kind of outbreak that got away, that would be one place that would do well. But then people are going to say it's in Asia, so is that an issue? If it was in a wealthier country versus a country that isn't, do you think that's going to have anything to do with it?
I don't think there's any bearing with respect to the questions you ask. And the reason why I say that is it's a place to hold, it's a venue that's going to hold the Olympics. What's the bigger concern? The 211 countries or more that are represented by those delegations, by these people all congregating. And imagine if those Olympic Games were in 3 or 4 weeks and we had Italy represented and Korea, South Korea, and they bring their microbes to the Olympics. It would create a devastating epidemic in and of itself. And that's one of the interesting things about the recent Chinese study that just came out. Interestingly enough, when this all started in Wuhan, it was during the Lunar New Year, the Chinese New Year.
Okay.
And what happens, the first part of the study was to actually look at the travel behaviors that the Chinese had done in the previous years to get an understanding of the numerator and the denominator, to understand how they change travel and how they affect the disease. So the first thing they did was shut down the travel. And that was the first treatment. No traveling within China or coming from without.
Okay.
It was President Trump who subsequently listened to what the Chinese were saying. So we're not going to fly there now. Well, the answer was they shut it down first.
Yeah.
Not only the people coming into China, but the people traveling within China.
Did Do you trust the information that came out of China initially? Is there something to the idea that they weren't releasing accurate numbers?
I don't know. On face value, yes, I have to trust those numbers to some degree. I've been with the ministers of health of China, and I'd like to believe that the purpose of the minister of health is to keep the people healthy. That said, in my question as we had dinner in the People's Hall of China at that time was really focused on, and this was in 2000, was focused on why is it that we see everybody focused on Eastern medicine in China, yet all the leaders have Western medicine clinics. Okay. And he answered very honestly, and he said, well, we have a lot of people here. We have 1.5 billion people, and we didn't have the money with Mao after the late 40s. So we had to keep people happy, and we had to do what was not only politically correct, but was feasible under those circumstances when you're managing 1.5 million people. Yeah. So they talked about herbs and massages and things like that, part of Eastern medicine. And when it came to leaders, they understand the functionality of Western medicine. So that said, I think the sense of realities, and I spent a month in Beijing for the Olympics there in 2008, the realities are a little bit different. But on face value, we have to trust what we get at this point.
Is there an advantage, I would imagine, I don't know, is there an advantage to having a more authoritative system of government and an ability to control the populace? Because when you look at like what's, I think there's a lot of trust that has to happen here, whether it's San Francisco or whatever city, that they'll self-quarantine, they'll stay within a certain area. There's just, there's just not the ability to to enforce all of these.
I think it's we have one of our greatest natural resources in this country is our mind, and we have tremendously smart academic people, scientific people, and clinicians, and we have great organizations, from the FDA, from the NIH, from Human Health Services. So you've got this tremendous focal number of people who are experts in this area, the CDC as well. And I were the president, I would convene those people, and every day in the lower corner of the computer would be a news conference at 8 a.m. and a map. Here we are. This is what we're doing in San Francisco. This is what we're doing in Michigan. This is what we're doing in Florida. This is what you don't need to do. You have to stay home. You need to be quarantined. We've got more testing. There'll be 400 more tests in Michigan and 200 more in Amarillo, Texas. And give people a sense that there is someone at the wheel of the 747.
There's a structure in place. We're going to get we're going to get information each day. Has to do with X, Y, and Z.
And that speaks to the third P that we talked about, giving people perspective. Helping people not panic. I get calls every day from people I know. My chest hurts, or this is going on. Do I have COVID-19? And it's first about perspective. No, you don't. It's okay. We're going to be okay here. Or if you are sick, this is what you need to do.
That's what you need to do. All generations have been faced with their challenges, some lesser than others. Talk about the greatest generation. All the way moving forward, this seems to be the challenge. I mean, that's certainly my kids, your kids' age. This is their big challenge. What can you maybe roadmap it to the end, just for having a good positive vision of how this might play itself out for the best in this situation?
Well, I think that we play this thing out and we learn about how the game changes here. We're in the end of the first quarter right now.
Okay.
So the game's going to change, and it's going to change in intensity and detail, however it shifts, up and down. We're going to be well positioned in terms of a game plan as we've now shut down everything we're doing, basically. We're isolating ourselves, and we're flattening that curve. Better in testing. Our big problem as we head into the second half, the third quarter, that we really have is the economics of it all.
Yeah.
As we go into April, I think that people are working just at the edge of their ability to pay their mortgage, their rent. I think that fortunately the government is kicking in some type of aid. We like the Yang approach where we give everybody $1,000. It's going to take the edge off. It's going to be good for everybody. And then we can take a deep breath. As we go into the fourth quarter here, then it's going to be the reality of how do we get back to the new. And I think what I forecast, society is going to look much different by the end of the fourth quarter. We're going to spend our lives differently. We're not going to get on cruise ships for the next few years.
Okay.
We're going to fly 50 or 80% less than we did before.
Okay.
Those of us who travel around the world like this, like a shuttle between here and London, we're not going to have that as much as we did before. We're going to conduct meetings on WebEx and Zoom and GoToMeeting. We're going to think about how we do things better in our local environments. We're going to have to figure out how to pay for the deficits that we're going to be faced with. And I think we're going to be much more serious of how to respond to those next challenges, which are going to be what we can do, what we should do, and most importantly, how we deal with the economics and the realities around that going forward as we get into the last minutes of the game here.
Yeah.
Honey, you think it might be time for a commercial?
Vámonos a Casablanca. Vámonos a Casablanca.
Casablanca Restaurant in Venice, proud sponsor of Sports Stories with Denny Lennon. So, Christine, do you know much about Casablanca?
The movie or the restaurant?
Oh, nice. How about the movie?
You mean the 1943 Best Picture?
Yeah.
Produced by Warner Brothers?
Yeah, that's the one.
All right.
Do you know who played Elsa?
Ilsa was played by Ingrid Bergman, I believe.
What? Who played Rick?
The Bogue, Humphrey Bogart.
Wow, this is amazing. Do you know much about, do you know where the city's located?
Well, I think it's like a port city in North Africa, Morocco.
Morocco, yeah.
Yeah.
This is something different. Yeah, and how about the restaurant? Do you know where the restaurant's located?
Oh, the restaurant's one of my favorites. It's right there on Lincoln at Rose.
Well, it is. So you answered all of the questions correct, as opposed to the last time we did this commercial with the other producer. However, I want to say this. While we're closed during these coronavirus times at Casablanca, they will be delivering packages, or you can pick up packages of food, and it's in effect the same that we got catered at our Super Bowl party, which was
Legendary Super Bowl party
and
for all those who missed it.
It was something else. Like, there's a taco bar with 3 different meats. They got enchiladas. They got their world famous tortillas. And Carlos told me this: if you are to mention Sports Stories with Denny Lennon, if you call him and mention Sports Stories with Denny Lennon, he'll throw in either a discount or margaritas. His number is 310-505-5091. That's 310-505-5091. You ask Carlos for the package deal and tell him you want the SSDL discount and or margaritas. Casablanca Restaurant and Sports Stories. I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Vámonos a Casablanca. La comida para la familia. Vámonos a Casablanca. Vámonos a Casablanca.
And now back to our Sports Stories interview with Dr. Bert Mandelbaum.
I like how you broke it down into quarters like that. It actually makes it a little more, for those of us who are sports-minded, makes it more thinkable.
Everybody, the human mind thinks in steps. When challenged with things that seem insurmountable, it was Winston Churchill that gave us the concept of believernomics, we called it at that time. Believernomics. They were being bombed every night. And he had to face the population, the British population, and inspire them to have perspective and how to understand it. Break it down. Let's get through tonight, and we'll deal with tomorrow. And believernomics is the optimism that even in the most dire of circumstances, we must all have perspective. There's going to be opportunities for success. There's going to be challenges. There's going to be that adversity. But if we do the right things, we work as a team. Remember, the team is together. Everyone achieves more.
Yeah.
And if we do that as a society, we're going to find things that we thought were scarce. such as money and other things or resources, it would become more abundant. And I think that's the undiscovered here. That's the unimagined opportunities. That's our ray of hope going forward.
Okay. I got hope.
That's good.
I always have hope.
Keep it up.
You know, one of the things that you when you were talking about considering it within quarters and stuff, I interviewed Craig Impelman, and he's Coach Wooden's grandson-in-law.
Sure.
Coached underneath him and stuff. So he brought over and he started to talk about that 68 team that had lost in the Astrodome game. Mm-hmm. And that was with Lou Alcindor and that team. And so it was the only time in the semifinals when they met him in the semifinals, because that was regular season. They met him in the semifinals. And it was the only time Coach Wooden changed his game plan. Instead of that 2-2-1 press, he went to like a diamond and one kind of configuration. And they blew out these guys that had beat them easily. And I thought, wow, even Coach adjusted at some point. And that's what's required of us now, is to look at this and adjust.
And adjust and adjust. And there's one story to end these stories that really, really focuses the efforts that we need to make. It was 2010, and we were playing the World Cup in South Africa. We're playing Algeria. We played, and we're in a situation where if we lose or tie, we go home. 90 minutes into the game, the score is 0-0 against Algeria. The ball is kicked. Tim Howard makes the save. We're now in the 91st minute. Tim Howard looks around, and he sees one player that he's looking for, Landon Donovan. He finds him, and the ball gets distributed to Landon Donovan. Landon Donovan at that one moment has two players on his back heels. And Landon Donovan, in his trademark moment, takes the ball and kicks it out in front. And he knows that in the 90th minute, he's just one step faster than these other two. And he runs away from those two other players, comes down the field. He crosses the ball, and Clint Dempsey is there. A shot is taken, and the shot is saved. But the ball presents itself as Landon continues his run down to the 6 yard, and the ball is right in front of him where he kicks the ball and puts it back of the net. It's that 91st optimism that won the game, that not only did we win the game, but we won the group. In that one moment, that 91st minute, he was able to go from we lost, we're bottom, to the top of the group. I call that 91st minute optimism.
I had that kind of optimism when I brought both of my kids in various times to you, at their point where they were less than optimistic because that knee isn't working and what they know isn't what they know anymore. And just your way of making them feel comfortable, letting them know they're in good hands. Like everything's going to move forward from here. And I would do the same. I kind of took that from you to whenever athletes that I was in charge of got hurt. I'd say, okay, moving forward now, everything's going to get better. Every day it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be challenges, but it's going to get better. And I got that kind of optimism from you. Born, Bert, in Long Island or New
York?
New
York, yes.
In the city? Or in the
born in New York City and brought up on Long Island, yes.
And so parents, jobs, what did they do?
My dad was a pharmacist. He's still living at 95. And my mom, a nurse, still living at 93.
Wow.
They're one of the few people in their 71st year of marriage.
Holy moly.
How many of those do you know?
Not many. That's
Not
first,
many.
I think.
That's right.
Any siblings?
Older brother.
Uh-huh.
Black sheep of the family. He's an attorney.
Okay.
And younger sister in the entertainment industry.
Okay. So you were you're sharing a great story when you're young, earlier before we started the interview. And I'd love for you to share that again about seeing your sports hero, Mickey Mantle. So would you have been, at the time, living in Long Island, and then you said something about your dad would take you on a particular night, but would that be that drive to the Bronx?
Yes,
wow.
Exactly.
Or did you jump on the subway? It always interests me. I just, those initial sports stories, when you see your first stadium or you see your first ballpark, there's something about it.
As we were talking about, Denny, I was a kid who was a number 7. As I said, it started as an athlete, continues to be an athlete. And I was that number 7 kid. I love Mickey Mantle. Those that were 24 who were the Willie Mays kids, but I was
Sure.
the number 7. It was the number I wore in everything I do. And my dad would take me to baseball games. I was 9 years old. And at the time, Mickey Mantle was playing right field. And he was obviously an iconic player, but he had amazing impact on me. And we would have tickets just behind the home team's dugout. But I would walk all by myself, and I loved going on a Wednesday night because those evenings in April were cool and somewhat misty. People wouldn't come out to the games, and the Yankees at that time weren't doing very well.
Mm-hmm.
And I would sit there with my chin perched on the fence, and I would stare at Mickey every move he would make. Every time he would move to the left, run to the right, he'd call. And I would do the same things, and I remember those moves time after time. And in one moment, Mel Stottlemyre was pitching, and he was being hit pretty hard. I remember that, and they were down 4-0 at the moment. And they decided to make a change, and Casey Stengel comes out and changed Mel Stottlemyre, and Mickey Mantle walks over to me with my chin on the fence of the right field fence, and he brushes against me, and his big forearm with that red hair, large forearms with actually tar and smelling. I could smell the nicotine from his chewing tobacco.
Man.
And the moisture in his wool uniform rubbing against my arm. Today, I remember it like it was yesterday. And that one moment, that Mickey moment, inspired me so much. As I said, it started with sports. It continues to be sports. There can be some concepts, some techniques, some technology in between, but it's always about sports.
Mm-hmm.
And I was lucky that when I worked for Bud Selig, and people referred to me as the soccer doc, but I talked about this, and next thing you know, I was given the jersey, the original jersey of Mickey Mantle, and it hangs in our offices here.
Love it. So you're young, growing up on Long Island, and is that where you got your affection and love of the sea?
Yes, it was. I grew up as a lifeguard. I spent 6 summers as an ocean lifeguard, and for me, I learned how to dive and scuba dive and fish and learned the love of the sea and maintain that as my hobby today.
And one of those hobbies includes swimming with the sharks.
I do.
So
I have this. I've always had, since my teenage years, a fascination with sharks. And in the last 20 years, I spent a lot of time in cages, out of cages, with large sharks, small sharks, videoing and photographing sharks.
When is the right time to come out of the cage? How do you know this? You just...
Well, it's like everything else. You have to know the behaviors of these sharks.
Okay.
You have to know what they do when they have predatory reflexes.
Mm-hmm.
We know that these sharks, when we dive at Guadalupe Island off of Mexico, some 250 miles from Ensenada, we know that these white sharks that average between 12 and 18 feet, that they always hunt from below. And if we stay above the cage, if we're in or out, they don't really see us or understand that we're nothing more than the cage.
Okay.
And so we could come out of the cage because they don't come down and hunt. They always go up to hunt.
Wow. Peter Benchley, he wrote the book Jaws in '74, but he, I think the idea came from in Long Island, like 10 years previous to that, like '64 or something. A massive great white was caught, right? Like 4,500 pound great white or something. Do you know that story?
Yeah, the story was, in fact, this was part of my fascination as a teenager. I read all those stories, and it actually was in New Jersey. That the shark had gone up the river and attacked young boys, and that was part of the stories upon which Jaws was written, and Peter Benchley.
I see.
Yeah. So it was going up the river, and that's what really created
So you read these stories about the boys getting bitten, and then you end up
I was a weird kid that I would have books on all the shark attacks in the world.
I love it.
All the shark species. I had this weird hobby. My mother always complained I would not want to read any other books other than books about sharks or fish or any of the like.
What was your first entry into like playing on a team in athletics?
What was my first injury?
Entry.
Oh, entry.
Yeah.
I played when I was younger. I played baseball in my teen years, and that was a big sport. And then, being from Long Island, I really began to play lacrosse. And football, which were my primary sports.
I always ask this question to my guests because I'm always interested. Was there somebody who kind of identified you, that saw some promise in you? Was a good mentor when you were a youngster?
I've been blessed. I've had some amazing mentors. And in fact, mentors really underscore my life all the way through. When I was young, I had some hard but great coaches that taught me about no sniffling, that there's no easy part of life, and we got a lot of kicks in the butt, and it was a tough love, I would say.
Right. I had those coaches.
Their names were McNamara and Goldmere, but they kicked our butt, and they got the most out of us, but it really taught me the empowerment themes. One of my biggest mentors that I really identified that had impact in my lives was JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And that famous speech, although I don't really remember it as a young child, it's not what your country can do for you, it's what you can do for your country. Those empowerment themes were things that myself and people around me were brought up with.
Yeah.
And I carried that to work ethic through school and in college and after college. And then you ask about mentors. I had a great mentor at Johns Hopkins by the name of Bob Scott.
Okay.
And Bob Scott, who was
athletic director there?
He became the athletic director after being a great coach, who was also a philosopher and really was extremely inspirational for me and a big mentor. For me in medicine, there have been many, but my other major mentor when I came and did my fellowship at UCLA,
which I find fascinating, that
I had a magical moment the very first day as a sports medicine fellow. I walked to Pauley Pavilion. I walked down the steps, and just to my right, standing there, is Coach Wooden. And Coach Wooden looked...
This is mid-'80s.
This is 1985.
Okay.
He hasn't been coaching for 7
10
years.
years or something, yeah.
For 7 years. He finished coaching in 78. And Coach looked at me, and I looked at him, and the first thing he did to me was give me the finger. Come on over, son. He said, sit down, because on the court, the basketball team was practicing at that moment. The coach was Walt Hazard. And Walt Hazard had a distinctive way of coaching. He would sit in about the 10th row of the bleachers with his arms at his side and a cigarette in his mouth. And the first thing Coach Wooden said to me was, as I introduced myself, I know who you are. And I said, Coach, I'm the fellow. He said, I know who you are. But he says, the first thing I want to ask you is, what is that guy doing over there? And I looked at him, and I looked back, and I said to myself, here I am. I have my first trick question. And I said, Coach, he's coaching. God, it's not coaching. You can't coach from the 12th row with a cigarette in your mouth. And that started a relationship.
Coach Wooden had his own problems when he was coaching Walt Hazard, and now he's going, what the heck, buddy? You're the same guy. I was trying to work on this with you.
That can't be coaching. You can't coach from the 10th row with a cigarette in your mouth. And that started a long-term relationship. And through my fellowship, through my years working at UCLA, I had this relationship with Coach. And every year I would meet with him until the year he passed away, where I'd bring residents and fellows to remind them of how impactful this icon was to sport.
It's something I always used in coaching. And I never really had the chance to meet him until later in life, but he was always so much a part of my life through his books, through just growing up and being enamored with that team, watching it on KTLA that I got to grow up with. You know, your Mickey Mantle was, interestingly enough, like my John Wooden, because I was always fascinated that same coach was there every year, and they won the championship every year. He was great. Now, speaking of winning championships, I got to back up for just a second.
But 1 second before
Yes, sir.
we get off of Coach Wooden, I have to tell you my very last moment with Coach. We had dinner out in the valley. We would pick him up, bring him in. He was in a wheelchair at the time. And about that time, he wrote a book. It was called For Children. It's called Inches and Miles.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've seen it. And maybe Ciena has read it.
Read it to them.
But for me, one of the most moving moments of my life was listening to Coach Wooden in a wheelchair with a basketball on his lap and with a book in front of him would read poetry to the group we assembled there in this restaurant.
Wow.
With my residents, with our fellows, with other doctors, reading the poetry from Inches and Miles.
Wow.
And so that image, that moment, was just such an inspirational moment for me.
He never stopped giving.
Never stopped giving.
Right
He
up
was
until
the
the last
poet.
second, he was trying to get better, too.
Right. And he was a poet, and people say, Dr. Bert, you're a philosopher. And I said, I know nothing but, because that's what I've been taught. The lessons that we've been imbued upon are come with the philosophy of life. And as I said, the intersection of the sport of life and the life of sport.
Life of sport. I'd heard that. I think I listened to you on a different podcast or something. But then, as I started to study, I started to lay out in front of me. So when you went to Cortland, you played lacrosse there,
Yes.
and it seemed to me that was a really important part of your life. That being athletic, and putting in the work. That started. It must have started much previous to that, but is that where it started to crystallize?
Yeah, I think
benefits of
it was an interesting time for all of us. For me, it was, learning how to be an athlete, learning out how to be somewhat of an academic. I had been more on the athletic side than the academic side. Cortland wasn't the best of academic institutions at the time, but we had some amazing professors. And, the forte there was about physical education, and we made the best of it on the biological side of it. I took marine biology and field biology, and those lessons, very few people got with my plant collections and the insect collections. So it was a very formative time for me in understanding the biology of the world and how it related to sport.
The Red Dragons.
The Red Dragons.
The Red Dragons. They won a title in like the mid '70s.
We
around
did,
that
1975.
time. Were you over at the school then? Were you?
Yeah,
You were on
I
that
was
team?
there, yeah.
Okay. See, now it gets interesting. Do you feel that being on a team that's standing there with the championship after your final game has some kind of long-term play in the end? I mean, Coach Wooden didn't win at that championship for like 16 years. Then he won 10 out of 12. But he'll tell you he was always in pursuit of something more, that it just wasn't just winning the championship. That it's all these things. And when I hear you talk, it sounds a lot like it. It's not as if you don't have championships, but you certainly understand that road.
Well, we understand the road, and we also understand when you don't have championships. If you look outside here, we've had Galaxy Championships where I'm the chief medical officer in 2011, 12, and 14. We haven't even smelled the championship since. And I always say in life, appreciate the championship. Appreciate the highlight, whether it be whatever that is, that you were the star on that team, or whether you get that part in that play, or you got that job that you wanted. What is your championship? And highlight that in your life and celebrate that moment, because not every day in this life that we call human life is about championships. But when it happens, you must celebrate it, enjoy it, and take the lessons and enjoy it to the best possibility you can.
From Cortland, you go over to Johns Hopkins, and then is that where you get involved in coaching?
Correct.
And they won a championship in like '78.
Yes.
Were you part of that coaching staff?
I was part of that coaching staff.
Look out.
Yeah. It was an interesting time, and working with Bob Scott and Henry Ciccarone at the time, being part of those staffs in 76 and 77. Now, 78, I already gone to medical school.
Okay.
So I was part of the coaching staff, but the particular year that I was there, we did not. I wasn't part of
Of that stuff, yeah.
I was part of the staff,
But you saw the
but I
process.
had left. Yes.
Yeah, you saw the process. John Hopkins obviously has this great academic reputation, but they're a power in lacrosse, right?
Yeah, and
They have a long history of that.
yeah, and for me that was another crossroad because I had come into coaching my job was to coach the B team, but it didn't start out that way.
Mm-hmm.
One of the coaches that I was supposed to be the TA for, that's how it first started. His name was Willie Scroggs, who one day came to me and he says, "Bert, the good news is I'm going to be the next coach of University of North Carolina. The bad news is you're going to be the next coach of our B team."
Okay.
So you got to try that on for size. I remember that day very
That's
well.
how a lot of people get jobs.
Yeah, and my first 4 months after graduating college, I'm a head coach of a B team of one of the major lacrosse traditions
Yeah, you are.
in America. And so we had 2 winning years, and the second winning year was the winningest year in Hopkins B team history, and I was being recruited to be coaches of other institutions, and specifically Princeton University.
Wow. So this is a crossroads.
Yeah, it was a crossroads, and for me, one of those amazing moments sitting with Coach Scott in his office as he sat back with his pencil and he says, "Let me see. Med school coaching, med school coaching, med school coaching." And he said, "Okay, I got it. I'll tell you this. I'll make a deal with you. You go to med school. You don't like it. You come back right here, and I'll get you a job as a coach. I promise."
That's fair. That's a mentor.
And that was the most amazing moment. What I learned from that moment was
That's a mentor.
how a mentor could sit back, how he could listen, process, speak at the right times, understand the needs of the mentee, and deliver.
He's working in your best interest.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
Instead of his. His is to try to convince you to stay on as his coach.
And those are the essence principles of being a leader that I've learned. And that's what we promulgate with the Win Within, how to teach people how to understand how to be a leader, about what self-assessment is and understanding self-control and the ability to know how to see yourself through other people and how you can embellish their lives.
So you hopped over to Washington University,
Yes?
and you had already so you're getting close to closing out your medical training
Another mentor.
Over at Washington.
A mentor before at Washington. But at Johns Hopkins, I work with a tremendous mentor. And I like to tell the story about the mentors because so many of our listeners are looking for those people. You're at those junctions in life where you need those people who have the wisdom and capability of influencing your life.
Sure.
That's part of the reality. That's the contract of being a mentor. And Dan Nathans at the time, he was a physician, also a Nobel laureate.
Wow.
In genetics.
Jeez.
And
wow.
the other thing I learned that in life you want to be associated with major icons and just live in the splash of them. He wrote me a letter, and instead, and I love to tell this story, that it all looks good, but my first application to medical school, I was rejected by 7 medical schools. My second application, I was accepted by all 7 medical schools. And a lot of it had to do, I think, with having the right mentors to give you the right ability to project yourself, to guide you into the right things. And that letter from Dr. Nathans, the Nobel laureate, really provided me that path. Hence, my really appreciation of mentors.
Then I think you went back to Johns Hopkins before UCLA, right? You said
Did
something.
5 years of residency at Hopkins.
You said something about Hopkins, like it was like training to be a Navy SEAL or something along these lines.
Yes.
That really, you felt like once you came out of that, you're ready for any challenge.
Well, Johns Hopkins had, in the medical arena, there was lacrosse and then there was the medical arena. And it was really the foundation for American surgery. The history, the tradition, so much of the techniques came out of Halstead and Osler and the Big Four at Johns Hopkins.
Okay.
But part of that was this tradition of training you like a naval SEAL, that really eating was a weakness, sleeping was a weakness, was really the themes that were promulgated amongst the residents. And I learned that there were 168 hours of the week, and all of them were game to work.
That's when I saw that, I thought there's some good training there, and now I can start to understand how he can hold all those positions. I still don't fully understand how you manage all of that, but I could see some of that training was taking place at Johns Hopkins, and then at UCLA, and I was just intrigued by your relationship with Coach Wooden, and I kind of remembered that from when we first started talking at Archer. One of the things that was interesting was I think you said that you didn't get the football or the basketball job, so the soccer job became yours. Had you had much experience with soccer prior to being the team?
None. In fact, I hated soccer.
Okay.
I hated soccer. It was, you're the young guy, and the older guys would take care of basketball and football with the big traditions. You take care of soccer. Okay. And I found the soccer guys much like the lacrosse guys that I knew and had experience with, and it was easy for me to interrelate. And it just turns out that Coach Ziggy Schmidt, who since passed away last year, let him rest in peace, a good friend of mine and who I attribute to my soccer career in soccer medicine, really took me under his wing and taught me the game, and I learned the medicine, and it just turned out I came to UCLA in July, and in December we won the national championship in soccer.
That was the same, was it 85 or whatever? Isn't that the same year they won the Rose Bowl too?
It was the same year. So
like
with
the Eric Ball.
It was the Eric Ball team.
Yeah.
It was actually 1986.
Would have been 86 Rose Bowl, but 85 season.
Rose Bowl, yes.
So you were there that year.
Yes.
That was a high point for UCLA.
That was a high point for UCLA. They haven't seen success like that since. No. That's why I say you have to appreciate championships. To win the soccer NCAA championship, to win the Rose Bowl with Eric Ball gaining 220 yards.
Yeah.
Gaston Green, that was all part of that.
Right, Gaston Green.
Yeah, that was all part of that team.
Wow. The campus must have been alive.
Oh, the campus was alive, and back then it was the Gutty Bruins. We were smaller and smarter than
the Gutty little Bruins. That was like Coach's original team, 64 or whatever.
That's right. Coach Donahue was there, and
Donahue was
another great mentor of mine.
Tell me about Coach Donahue a little bit. I think he might be the winningest Pac-12 coach ever. I think he's kind of gets lost in the shuffle sometime because UCLA, has a shadow of USC's football program over them. But Donahue was tremendous amount of consistent success.
Incredibly intense leader, but an incredible methodology and intensity of the principles of leadership. I really learned a lot from him, and I loved his intensity.
Wow.
He was so focused, and I was mesmerized with his ability to be so focused as he was.
Yeah, he was something. Around this time, do you join the Santa Monica Orthopedic Group?
Yes.
Is this around the time you're, or had you been married prior to this?
Got married in 1988.
Okay, so lots going on at this time.
Yes. Found my wife, Ruth. We married in October of 88. Also a doctor, and went on to have 3 kids.
Was she a doctor prior to, or was it while you guys were both? She was already a doctor by the time you met her?
Well, the story be told, and here it is. Here it was. I was a young faculty, and this is what perhaps Grey's Anatomy was built upon.
Oh, really?
And she was the medical student, so it was a different time in the 80s. Sure. We didn't have some of the principles and the rules, and the credos were different. They had a rule that you couldn't, as a faculty, you couldn't date medical students, but in fact you could marry them. So in fact, no one knew that we were dating until we got engaged. And so everybody first knew about it was once we were engaged.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, men used to run naked in the Olympics. Mm-hmm. So we all make our...
And 3 kids and 31 years later, we're still functioning.
Okay, and that was part 2 of our interview with Dr. Bert Mandelbaum.
Such a fascinating and thoughtful and inspirational guy. We'll get to dive in part 3 a little bit more with the evolution of his book, The Win Within.
I am
channeling.
so interested in listening to part 3. Part 1 and part 2, it's fascinating to hear him speak. I love to listen to what Dr. Bert Mandelbaum has to say.
Yeah, he really is something. We also are fortunate that he took us in and spent a long time with us, and it's very relevant material for these times right now.
Yeah, SportsCenter, ESPN just did a topic of the same piece,
Yep.
Coronavirus in Sports. It's the exact same title.
Yep, we're right on point. We got Facebook Live coming up.
You promised Coach Mike Boley from Loyola High School. Is that still happening?
Yeah, so obviously last week we put it off for a week. We just wanted everybody to take a breath while everything was going
Makes
down.
sense.
And so, as long as technically we can figure out a way that he can, appear on Facebook Live, that's the gig. And it's going to be interesting because he's, such a successful coach for a long time. But more importantly, he's got a team that's just chomping at the bit to play. They want to go win that section title. And it's interesting to hear how he might be interacting with his players and how he's managing their expectations in these completely uncertain times.
We both know so many coaches, and it looks different for every program out there, what they're doing with their teams to keep them involved and keep them connected. And I'm really interested into what Coach's got to say about his team.
All right, Facebook Live tomorrow, next Thursday, part 3 with Bert Mandelbaum. Now it's time for an installment of As Time Goes By, where we get to know Carlos Haro Jr. of Casablanca Restaurant in Venice, 1 minute at a time. Now, let's play it again with Carlos Jr. Carlos, tell me about your wife and 2 daughters. Where did you meet your wife? Tell me about your first date, and then tell me a little bit about your 2 girls.
Okay, my wife, I met her at my Uncle Gilbert's house. She's an attorney. She came over, and I saw this. I said, this person's never going to pay attention to me. So I kind of just do it. And I saw her, and I tried grabbing her number, and she ended up having a blocked number. But I didn't know that. I thought all cell phone numbers were unblocked. So I said, just call me. I'll have your number. The next day, I was going to call her, and I realized I don't have her number. So it took me about 2 weeks to find her number, and then randomly I called her office and said, hi, do you remember me? And she's like, what took you so long? But
Nice.
she is probably a wonderful woman, and probably the
What
one
was
that
your
keeps
first
it.
date?
First date, I'm trying to remember. Oh, first date, she lived in Santa Maria. I drove all the way there because I didn't care. And I was starving, and I thought I was going to eat a big meal. And she ordered 3 appetizers, and I literally remember after the date going to McDonald's and eating because I was still so hungry. But I said I had the best time. And to this day, I still remember that. It's like, oh, my God, I was ready to eat. And you're like, I've ordered for us. And I'm like, this is it? I'm like, oh, okay. And that was it.
Tell me about your 2 girls.
My oldest daughter's Belen, and she is probably the one I hang out with the most, and I always pick up ideas from her, and she always keeps me current on everything. And my oldest one is exactly like myself, so it's sometimes hard because we're always arguing about the same thing, but she has the same sense of humor, and she could always make me laugh. She's the one that always, like, if you need a good laugh, she's always there.
Nice. Sports Stories with Denny Lennon is supported by the AAU. Find a local event and join at aausports.org. And remember, you can catch your favorite amateur sports live stream, replays, and highlights at ballertv.com. Sports Stories, along with East Bay, supports the Heroes Movement, a nonprofit that bridges the gap from mental or physical therapy to getting strong again through strength and conditioning workouts. This free service is available for any veteran of the United States Armed Forces. Visit heroesmovementusa.org for more information. Sports Stories with Denny Lennon is a production of Sports Stories, Inc. and is available on Apple Podcasts and YouTube or wherever you listen and watch. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and give us a review. It really helps spread the word. You can find all our social media links, archives, and other info on our website at sportsstoriespodcast.com. Special thanks to the John R. Wooden Course and Wooden's Wisdom. Original music for Sports Stories is courtesy of Lennon Music Productions. Original images by Ciena Lennon Photography. Sports Stories is produced by Marley Rice, edited by Bob McCall, and researched by Teresa Dolan. Additional staff include Christine Jimbo, Jake Downey, Ray Castro, and Buck Magic Lennon.
Hey people, it's Sports Stories with Denny Lennon. A new episode every Thursday. Get there as fast as you can, even if you have to grab your breakfast to go.
Check it out, Buck.